Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Happy Thursday, everybody. Yesterday, Wednesday, the US House of Representatives comfortably passed the Protecting Foreign Adversary Controlled Application Act. The bill, which, if passed into law, would require Beijing-based ByteDance to divest TikTok or face being banned in the US, now goes to the Senate, where commentators argue it will face a tougher challenge. Senators Mark Warner and Marco Rubio, the chair and ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, have both thrown their support behind the bill. However, Senator Maria Cantwell, a Schumer ally who chairs the Senate Commerce Committee, is opposed to the bipartisan House bill and wants the legislation referred to her committee for review. Senator Rand Paul also pledged in an interview to block any measure that he felt violated the Constitution. Americans, quote, chose to use TikTok to express themselves, end quote, he said on Tuesday. Quote, I don't think Congress should be trying to take away the First Amendment rights of 170 million Americans. End quote. TikTok CEO Chu has begun meeting with senators to make his company's case. So the Senate is still a question, but the White House appears behind the bill. In an interview this week, Biden's National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan expressed, quote, First, I want to make it clear that what this bill is about. A lot of people are going around throwing around words like ban TikTok and TikTok ban. The ultimate object of this bill is about a question of ownership. Do we want TikTok as a platform to be owned by an American company or owned by China? Do we want the data from TikTok, children's data and adults' data, to be staying here in America or going to China? That is the fundamental issue at question here. The president is clear where he stands on that fundamental issue. End quote. This issue of data protection is a key consideration. Earlier this year, US-based Wall Street Journal reported that the special standalone unit, codenamed Project Texas, which oversees American data and content recommendations on its app, struggles to protect US data from its China parent. The outlet writes, quote, In it, managers sometimes instruct workers to share data with colleagues in other parts of the company and with ByteDance workers without going through official channels. Meanwhile, ByteDance workers in China update TikTok's algorithm so frequently that Project Texas employees struggle to check every change, and fear they won't catch problems if there are any. End quote. There is also the argument that most countries, including the US, already have laws restricting foreign ownership of old legacy media, such as television and the press. Rupert Murdoch had to become an American citizen before taking over Fox News. A Chinese company would not be allowed to buy, for example, CNN. Yet TikTok, which is far more influential, is not covered by these laws. The US Director of National Intelligence told a House of Representatives Intelligence Committee hearing on Tuesday that China could use social media on TikTok to influence the 2024 presidential election. Meanwhile, Beijing swiftly condemned the passage of the bill. People's Republic of China Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin yesterday called the move hegemonic, expressing, quote, In recent years, though the US has never found any evidence of TikTok posing a threat to the US's national security, it has never stopped going after TikTok. End quote. Beijing, of course, will not be pleased with these developments. Quote, One reason the PRC policymakers may say no to any divestment of TikTok is that TikTok is the first global internet platform from China. The government for years has talked about the need to increase its share of international discourse power, about telling China's story well, yet the global efforts to do that have primarily relied on American platforms like YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. TikTok helps break that disruption stranglehold. End quote. But if divestment is allowed, how much is it worth? This is the $100 billion question. Interestingly, US tech and business outlet The Information reports this week that TikTok's parent ByteDance doesn't disclose TikTok's financial performance, but ByteDance investors estimate TikTok lost several $1 billion last year on revenue of roughly $20 billion. Quote, Now, as investors brace for the likelihood that TikTok will disappear from the US, investors are having to reassess their view of what ByteDance's value would be without TikTok, at least in the US. Some are now arguing that without TikTok's losses, ByteDance's bottom line would be stronger. Meanwhile, some investors say a resolution of the uncertainty about TikTok's fate in the country could speed a possible initial public offering for ByteDance, allowing shareholders to finally realize their gains. End quote. Next up, the Chinese economy. Hey guys, if you enjoyed today's episode of China Update, don't forget to hit that like button. It's just me making these episodes every day. It's a lot of work, but your guys' support is a huge source of motivation. Subscribing and sharing is a huge help as well, and for those who can go the extra mile and help me keep the channel financially sustainable, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Next up, we move to the economy. The State Council has released an action plan aimed at increasing consumption. According to the plan, the scale of equipment investment in areas including industry, agriculture, construction, transportation, education, culture, tourism, and medical care is planned to increase by more than 25% by 2027 compared with last year. Pantheon Macroeconomics chief China economist Duncan Wrigley writes that the plan should add 0.7 percentage points of growth each year until 2027, with most of the boost coming from support for car purchases, adding, quote, "The action plan includes incremental support each year up to 2027, putting a floor under domestic demand and providing space for industrial restructuring and resolving property sector issues without resorting to a big credit stimulus." End quote. In a recent report, Goldman Sachs economists estimated that if China spends around 800 billion yuan, $111 billion to provide a subsidy of 20% for purchases of upgraded cars, major home appliances and equipment, the plan could induce 800 billion yuan of further spending this year, with about 0.6% of last year's gross domestic product. This, of course, is not much extra growth in the grand scheme of things, and it's not clear whether it will work, but we note the development and move on. Meanwhile, it appears that moral hazard is fueling a renewed buying of local government financing vehicle bonds because of confidence that the government will not allow them to fail. Chinese financial media outlet Caixin has produced an excellent long-form piece this week on this topic called "Why China's Efforts to Resolve Hidden Government Debt Could Fall Short." The sheer scale of the country's local government hidden debt, up more than 70 trillion yuan, $9.8 trillion, according to some estimates, more than twice Germany's GDP, means that Beijing's recent measures are at best far inadequate and will provide only temporary relief to what experts say is a looming liquidity crisis for regional authorities, the outlet writes. While previous plans to resolve hidden debt took a more piecemeal approach, the most recent moves, which the top leadership at a July meeting called a package of debt-resolving plans, have prompted cities and provincial-level regions across the country to issue more than 1 trillion yuan of special refinancing bonds to repay some of their off-the-books debt. The proceeds will mainly be used to repay local government hidden debt that had been recorded by the Ministry of Finance by 2018 and will mature by the end of 2024, and will also be used to pay certain government arrears owed to businesses, sources told Caixin. The total issuances in this round may end up rising 1.5 trillion yuan. Meanwhile, the outlet writes, since September, the central government has been instructing commercial banks in 12 heavily indebted provincial-level regions to restructure local government financing vehicles, non-standard debts, or swap them for bank loans with longer maturities and lower interest rates, in a bid to relieve repayment pressure on local authorities and their local government financing vehicles. Quote, "One problem is that despite the ban on local authorities from providing implicit guarantees for local government financing vehicle bond repayments, the rescue package reinforces investor belief that these bonds won't default because the government will come to the rescue. Thus, in a spiraling cycle, investors are again scooping up these debt instruments. Simply put, instead of discouraging the issuance of local government financing vehicle bonds, the package has made the bonds in hot demand again." End quote. Meanwhile, Beijing has ordered a dozen highly indebted areas, many of them less developed and far from the coast, to curb investment spending as it tries to unwind a decade-long investment binge many believe is unsustainable. While this is a healthy move in the long run, it does mean less growth. At the National People's Congress last week, Premier Li Qiang said, quote, "We will make a concerted effort to diffuse local government debt risks while ensuring stable development." End quote. According to a paper last year by Victor Shi of the University of California, San Diego, Chinese local government debt, including off-balance sheet financing vehicles and shadow credit, was probably equivalent to between 75 and 91% of national GDP in 2022. The deleveraging process started last year, with state banks restructuring debts. Quote, "It's clear that policymakers think they can get around this by essentially having the central government issue more bonds and do more of the fiscal work itself for the local governments, while at least some of them engage in a sort of fiscal retrenchment. I think it creates a lot of room for policy error." End quote. Now, I wanted to end today with a US-based AP News piece, which reminds us how China has tools to prevent financial crisis through systemic control. But it doesn't mean there isn't costs. It's just that Beijing can choose on whom the costs are placed. The Associated Press piece writes that Sichuan Trust, headquartered in the southwest city of Chengdu, announced it was insolvent in 2020, stricken by failed investments in shopping malls and other projects. Indeed, the housing crisis hit the trust very hard. A deadline earlier this month, the outlet writes, to accept a 20 to 60% so-called haircut or loss on their investments has left hundreds of investors, most of which are poor retirees, in deep financial trouble. The outlet writes, quote, "On a recent visit to the company's headquarters, dozens of uniformed officials, half a dozen police vehicles, and an empty bus were parked outside. More than a dozen plainclothed agents, who refused to identify themselves, followed 2 AP journalists around. Earlier, a Dutch journalist was shoved to the ground and forced into a police vehicle when he attempted to approach protesting investors. They kidnap you, they threaten your children," said one investor, who also did not want to be identified due to fears of police harassment. "They have so many dirty tricks," the investor added. End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a good Thursday, and I will see you all tomorrow.